Hey guys, Kristal here, and today I'm going to be reviewing something a little different from usual. Today, I bought a comic. I bought a Supergirl comic. So, since I know some Supergirl stuff from watching the TV show, I thought I'd give it a read and see how it compares to what I know. And it is definitely quite different. So, starting off just looking at the front cover, Supergirl's outfit is all wrong. She put the emblem in a place it does not belong, which you'll see in the picture on the screen. And instead of her usual skirt, she is wearing very short shorts, which can get a bit revealing in certain pictures. Speaking of revealing, the other character on the front cover is barely dressed. I hate it when people put female characters in a comic but then they make them barely dressed. I hate it. But I almost forgot to say the name of this comic. It is Crisis Over Chicago. They really like the word crisis. But yeah, Crisis Over Chicago, because apparently Supergirl lives in Chicago. Who knew? And the cover also advertises that they put in an extra comic called Lois Lane starring in The Bogeyman Will Getcha. The Bogeyman. Seriously, that sounds so dumb. And I'm saying that knowing that there is a Doom Patrol episode called Dumb Patrol. Yeah, these titles are really dumb. But for anyone reading the comic that doesn't know much about Supergirl, not to worry, because the first page gives us her backstory. It explains the usual stuff, how she got sent to Earth as a teenager when Krypton was destroyed and she has powers on Earth. But it also mentions something I did not know. In this comic, as I mentioned, she lives in Chicago, but also in her civilian life, her name is Linda Danvers. Okay, well, that is very different from what I'm used to, but at the same time, it kind of makes sense. I mean, I don't know where they got the name Linda, but what I mean by it makes sense is that I always found it weird that she uses the name Kara as Supergirl and in her regular life, whereas Clark Kent has the name Clark and he has his original Krypton name being Kal-El. But, in the shows, usually, Clark has a reason for being called Clark, which is he was a baby when he landed on Earth. So, obviously, the humans had to give him the name Clark because he wouldn't have been able to tell them, hey, my name's Kal-El. No. But whatever, so her name is Linda for some reason. But the story starts off with her fighting the villain I mentioned on the cover, whose name is Psi, like PSI. Pretty on the nose, but first thing we notice about her is that she kind of reminds me of Firestorm, because she has this guy talking to her in her head called Mr. Pendergast. And the fight goes on for quite a while. It gets kind of boring at times. The only thing that stood out to me is that there's this funny line when Supergirl says, "Great row! No! Sheer pandemonium below!" And it's just the wording is so weird but funny, I guess. So she's like really determined, and that's how she wins, I guess. I mean, Sai thinks she's saving the world for some reason, and then Supergirl's like, "Can't you see you're hurting people?" And then Sai is like, "Oh my god, I am." But then Mr. Pendergast shuts her down, and she's like, "Oh, don't listen to her lies. Listen to me instead." But Supergirl still wins, And then she says my favourite line of the comic. So she says, "It doesn't make much sense, I suppose, but then this episode's bonkers from the start." So she just breaks the fourth wall and admits this whole thing is bonkers. And then she flies away, and we see this seemingly random girl, or so I thought. But then after 2 pages, I notice that no, it is in fact Supergirl, or rather Linda. Turns out, instead of hiding her face with glasses, which everyone agrees is dumb, in this world, she actually wears a wig. So she really does look like a completely different person. Like, yes, it makes sense to wear a wig so that she's a brunette in one life and blonde as Supergirl. But in a comic, you really need her to be recognizable as the same character to not confuse people, but it has its pros and cons. But whatever, so she's brunette and her name is Linda. She has a boring scene talking to her new neighbors. Then we get an interesting scene with Mr. Pendergast yelling at Gale. By the way, Gale is Sai's name. And Mr. Pendergast tells her she's of no use to the fight, which I guess that means he was just using her for something. And then he pulls out a gun, and then she somehow reacts by using her powers, and she like turns him into some sort of weird blob, and that's it. And that's it for the comic. And it's like, what the hell? It's really confusing, and I'm sure it'd make more sense if I had the next comic, so I could see more of what happens next. But this is just some random thing I picked up at a store. It was still interesting to see a different version of Supergirl. But as I mentioned before, as it mentioned on the cover, the book also includes Lois Lane in a story called The Bogeyman Will Getcha. And I'm not going to ramble too much about that because it only goes for like 2 pages. And it was not interesting. I enjoyed it even less than the main story. The main story was okay. It just, I don't know, it didn't really hold my interest. And not just because it was a written format and not a TV show, but, you know, I'm okay with reading. I thought it could be interesting. It was interesting to see the differences, but the story itself it's kind of hit or miss with these things, I guess. But I've rambled on enough, and even though I don't have any other comics to compare it to, just for consistency's sake, I'll give it a rating, and I'll say 6.5. It's okay, it's whatever. But I hope you enjoyed this random review of a Supergirl comic. I've rambled on long enough. See you next time, guys, where we will get back to our usual Arrowverse and Steven Universe reviews. This was just a little one-off thing. See you next time, guys.